Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Today we're going to talk about the nature of violence and what motivates aggression in society. My guest today is Dr. Anila Bhagavatula. Dr. Bhagavatula is an adjunct professor in the Department of Psychology. Welcome, Anila, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as we begin this discussion about the nature of violence, perhaps we should turn that question around and say, is violence in our nature? In other words, are we born with it? Is it part of our genetic makeup? Is it in our DNA? Is it an evolutionary trait because maybe violence was necessary in the struggle for survival of the fittest? Or is it more of a psychological or emotional need for dominance and control? What do you think it is?
On the contrary, it's actually neither of these. I'm going to address both of those issues separately. As far as evolution, the majority of individuals are not aggressive. So when we speak about the idea of something being evolutionary, what evolutionary psychologists look for is that it is something that is present in the majority of individuals. So if you're talking about something like parental care, where around the world the majority of parents will make sacrifices for their children, will give up their own lives for their children, that's something where we say this is present in so many people. Aggression is not like that. Aggression, for all the sheer numbers of aggressive acts that we see, is not present in the majority of individuals. So in that sense, it kind of obliterates the idea that it is an evolutionary need, because if we say survival of the fittest, not that many people would have survived as are alive today because the majority of people are not aggressive. The psychological need for dominance is an interesting issue. There is that sense of, well, I want to win, I want something, but it isn't that we are dominating for the sake of it. Rather, aggression seems to be more in a sociocultural sense, that it's coming from a competition for resources, a competition for resources that could be economic, political, social. It could be anything from fighting for the fertile land to fighting for social status. So there is that need for dominance, but again, not dominance for its own sake, but more in the sense of competing for minimal amounts of things that are available.
So as we're talking about war being the ultimate expression of violence and aggression, it does involve usually a rationalization for the need for more land or more resources or more control politically or socially, what have you. And we also have ideology entering into the justification for war along with the economic motivations, sometimes religion, sometimes philosophy, sometimes difference of systems, communism versus capitalism, that kind of thing. But war involves great organization of large numbers of people. And for the average individual, the thought of actually attacking or killing someone, especially a stranger who we've never met, is abhorrent. It's not something that seems to be in our nature. We want to get along, for the most part, with our neighbors. And so how do we make that leap from wanting to get along with our neighbors to being actively engaged and involved in this organized effort of extreme violence known as warfare?
There are two potential reasons that happens. Certainly, war in much of modern history has seemed common. There are two reasons that we are able to overcome, as you said, this somewhat natural revulsion to murder. One potential reason is that if we say, well, there is this universal taboo against murder, which there is, one potential reason that we are still able to engage in warfare is that our desire to achieve whatever the end gain is of that war, that desire is stronger than the code that we're breaking. So the desire for that land, the desire for, on a smaller scale, particular social status, for example, is stronger than as you mentioned, the universal taboo against murder. That's one potential thing. Simply that, yes, this is strong, but we have something else that's stronger, this need that's stronger. Another potential reason, and the more likely reason, is that although there is a universal taboo against murder, many of us can envision particular circumstances where murder would be justified and even imaginable. For example, if we saw someone harming our child, or simply in the act of self-defense, we could say, well, if someone was doing this to me, I would be able to kill them, okay? If they're pointing a gun at me and I had a gun, I would kill them. So because we're able to imagine aggression in these narrow circumstances, the whole idea of war becomes, how do you put the war in a justifiable context? And many times, war becomes about this act of self-defense. So on an individual level, we can imagine if somebody was attacking me, oh, I would attack them back, okay? I would try to save my life, right? So war, often justification, especially by political leaders, for example, who are the ones that are mobilizing these large groups, as you talked about, becomes about, we need to defend. What are we defending? We're defending our government, we're defending our democracy, we're defending our way of life, we're defending our ideology. Sometimes it does become about, we're defending our resources, but ultimately that still becomes a self-defense issue. It's like, well, if they get our resources, we'll lose money, we'll lose food, our children will, So it still really becomes about the idea that murder is wrong unless someone is trying to hurt you, and war becomes about, oh, this group is already hurting us, or they could potentially hurt us, so let's take care of this first.
So if we look at World War II, that's the classic example of where America entered the war as liberators. And it was certainly justifiable for America to enter the war to defeat Nazism or imperialism and all of the terrible things that were going on around the world. And at the end of the war, we actually helped our enemies. We helped rebuild Japan and Germany. And so it wasn't personal, if you want to look at it that way. It was about ideology and systems and so on. But of course, as soon as that war was over, another war developed, a Cold War between us and the Soviets. And so then we were lining people up on our side. They were lining people up on their side, sometimes by force. But nonetheless, it still was a matter of us versus them. There's always this alignment process that occurs. So if that is the case, is it in our nature to want to align ourselves with others, to create alliances? And if that's the case, are we always going to be battling this urge to go to war or to battle or to fight against the other, if it's us versus them?
There is a very prevalent view of us versus them, which I will address. I would not say that us versus them is naturally leading to war. Us versus them is kind of a general issue that's separate from aggression. So I'm going to discuss the us versus them mentality in terms of both the cognitive perspective and the motivational perspective. So the cognitive perspective of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination points out that, leaving aside individuals and groups, we categorize everything. So taking out any emotional valence out of this equation, we categorize everything. We say which foods are hot and which are cold. We say, which countries are small and which are big. We have all these different ways that we kind of parcel out how things are. So what the cognitive perspective says is that categorizing individuals as us versus them simply makes our social lives easier. And social in the broad sense, not to socialize per se, but how do you understand your world? So for example, categorizing yourself as a political liberal and your boss as a political conservative allows you to navigate the conversations better. So there might be some comments that you might hold in check, like, oh, I can't say that in front of this person. So what the cognitive perspective tells us is that the us versus them mentality is very prevalent and very difficult to obliterate. But why would we obliterate it? Because that categorization makes things easier, okay? Just like I said, like we categorize so many different things. Now, the motivational perspective goes a step beyond that and says, anytime you put things into categories, you are going to attach a judgment to which is better. So even if you say, well, these foods, Thai foods, Indian foods, they're spicy, and these foods are mild, German food, British food, okay? Simply just so that you can understand the differences. Then you say, oh, I like spicy food. I love Thai food. I love Indian food. And by that same token, now what the motivational perspective says is what began really as a way to just organize our world into groups. This is us. Oh, I'm not from there. They are. Now, why is it called the motivational perspective? Because once you have groups of people, you are motivated to view your group as better. Because if you say this group is better, by extension, you are better. So you are politically liberal, your boss is politically conservative. That helps categorize conversations. But now that you have done that, you feel like, well, liberal people are better, let's say. And by thinking that, you're saying, well, I'm better. Because the alternative is to say there's these multiple groups and that group is better. Then you're taking a hit on your own self-esteem. What are you saying? Like, what do you mean that that country is better, or that religion is better, or that, whatever, socioeconomic strata is better? My group is better. Oh, by the way, I'm in that. That makes me better as well. So the issue of can we control aggression in the us versus them mentality? Or I guess it was a two-part question. Can we control the us versus them mentality, and can we control the aggression? It is very difficult to control the us versus them mentality, since it is so ingrained in how we view the world at large, aside from people. But that's a separate issue from controlling aggression. We are not, as we talked about a few moments ago, we're not actually aggressive most of the time, nor are the majority of people aggressive. So we can keep that us versus them mentality and work on reducing the aggression.
Well, let me talk about that for a moment, because it seems like the us versus them can be used in a positive way as well, in teamwork, for example.
Yes.
For sports, if you follow a certain team, you want your team to win. And they obviously have to beat the other team in order to be successful. So that's a positive outcome. Also, if we have a business dynamic where we have two businesses competing, as long as they're following the rules and not breaking the law, business competition is fair game. I think we've all decided that that's the case. And also we have contests. We have decorating contests. We decorate or design the Rose Bowl float, and if our team wins on the Rose Bowl float decorating contest, so much for the better.
Of pride, right?
So is that the best way to channel that kind of us versus them mentality?
A competition?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Channel is a great word, because it is a great way to channel it. It is not a way to reduce it. If anything, team competition actually increases the us versus them mentality, because now you have social validation for your views. You found a whole bunch of people that, like you, think your group is better, right? So maybe initially you're in isolation thinking, hey, this group is better. Now, you join a club and they're all saying, yes, our fraternity or our sorority or our whatever, the ski club or the sailing club, we're better for these reasons. So ironically, even though the us versus them mentality is a way to channel aggression, have socially appropriate ways to have aggression and keeps it in check, that again is a separate issue from the mentality of us versus them. That's actually increased in this competition, but on the plus side, it's a way to have socially sanctioned competition, if you will.
And on that note, we've actually reached the point where we need to take a break.
Okay.
So we'll be back in a moment, and when we do come back, we'll talk about whether violent video games affect youth and make them more aggressive, and also we'll analyze road rage and what's behind it. Stay tuned.
Make a difference in someone's life. Teachers, principals, and guidance counselors can have an enormous impact on students' lives. Be that person. Be the inspiration to empower others to be the best that they can be. You can become a part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, and my guest today is Dr. Anila Bhagavatula. Anila, before the break, we were talking about organization of the us versus them mentality and channeling it in a positive way. But that still involves sort of a team effort or a group effort, and could be large-scale organization if we're talking about corporate competition.
Right.
Let's go now to the more individual level and individual people and the kinds of things that they see or experience on a more or less daily basis. Fortunately, this isn't a daily thing, but we do witness road rage periodically, and we certainly read about it and hear about it in the media. And road rage is something which is, it's not affecting all of us or even a majority of us. Again, it's a small group, but for a small group, larger than it should be, but a small group will affect this road rage mentality or behavior on the freeway, and it can sometimes have very devastating consequences. So what is behind road rage, and where is it coming from?
What is behind road rage is the same thing that causes these individuals to be, or predisposes them to be aggressive, even off the road. So we're talking about risky behaviors that they engage in. We're talking about low impulse control. We're talking about narcissism, egotism. So these are the same things that they are prevalent in their daily lives as well. So on the road, what you're talking about is somebody that has small acts of aggression in general, and now they have a weapon, which is this car. So my point is that these individuals that are engaging in road rage are the same individuals that will berate a server for some, minor error in their meal. The same person that will, lash out at their children because they didn't clean their room when they were supposed to. So these are the same people that have issues of aggression in a variety of contexts, and now you have given them a weapon, which is their car, essentially. The other thing I was going to say with that, with road rage specifically, is that there is a hypothesis called the cognitive neo-associationistic view. It's a mouthful, but the idea is that we are associating many things with aggression. So if we are, for example, already frustrated and we have a weapon present, it could be the car, it could be the knife, it could be a gun, we're more likely to use it. In the absence of the frustration, it won't matter that that weapon is there. If we are frustrated simply because we're running late to work or it's hot, the idea of the cognitive neo-associationist perspective is that we feel frustrated and we're looking in the environment for why we are frustrated. So if somebody is in traffic and it's hot and they're like, I'm running late to work and look at this person that is stopping me from getting there on time, that is something that they're attributing their frustration to this person. So that link is made where it almost becomes, in their mind, justified, because I am frustrated, and what is linked to my frustration? You are linked, and you couple that with the presence of a weapon, and that's when you can have these horrible incidents.
So how does this correlate with anger management as well? Is there a link between this kind of phenomenon and anger management as well?
Or lack thereof, basically. Yeah. Yes, oh, definitely. Unfortunately, the individuals that need the anger management the most are the ones that are least likely to go and take it, in the absence of loved ones that say you should go, or a court order that says, you know what, you had this problem, you should go for these classes. So yes, anger management classes are great, and there's a lot of self-help ways to decompress and relax as well. Many things out there, actually biofeedback, but unfortunately a lot of individuals that become angrier compared to, let's say, the general population don't feel like they're in the wrong. So they don't consider themselves angry. They consider themselves kind of victims of different situations. So they don't see the reason for anger management classes. Their point is, well, the only reason I get angry is because people don't do what they're supposed to. I was only angry because this person cut me off. I was only angry because my boss said this. And it's always coming on other people. So there are as I said, tremendous number of anger management techniques that are very successful, similar to, let's say, meditation techniques that also are very successful, but they're unfortunately not being used by the people that need them the most. Mm-hmm. So, and that whole sense of, why do I need things like that? That sense of narcissism is part of why they become angry anyway.
Right,
so,
there's a kind of narcissistic entitlement
yes,
there.
Exactly. So as such, they wouldn't think, when you're talking about feeling like you're better than other people and so you're getting angry, then because you're blaming them, you don't think you need to work on yourself anyway. So,
all right, well, let's talk about video games and media and the potential to influence people through the exposure to these violent images. As far as violent video games and children or youth or teenagers playing violent video games, is there any indication that these violent video games actually cause youth to be more aggressive? Some studies would suggest yes. Other studies say, well, not really, because this is just a kind of cathartic release of tension. And some of these video games, even if they're very violent, involve teamwork. And so you actually have the teamwork aspect of of teenagers working together to defeat the enemy or what have you. And also the idea that basically statistics show that violent crime by youths, juvenile delinquents, has actually gone down in the last 20 years when at the same time video game sales have skyrocketed. So there seems to not be a link between sales of video games and increases in crime and violence by juveniles. So the question is, could actually both things be true? That the exposure to these violent images desensitizes people and also causes them to be lackadaisical when they see incidents of violence, or not concerned or lack empathy, but it doesn't actually cause them to become more aggressive.
That is actually very possible. And in fact, what we do see is a marked decrease in empathy in children and adults who are repeatedly exposed to violent images. So, and we define empathy as the ability to take someone else's perspective, to see things from their view. So empathy is decreased even in those who are non-aggressive. So that's one. So when you talk about desensitization, that's certainly a concern. Also, I want to differentiate between the question of, is there a link between violent video games and aggression versus is one causing the other? So we do see a link in that we see simple correlations that these individuals who are playing more violent video games do exhibit more verbal and physical aggression. But the key is that we cannot make a causal claim. The main reason we can't make a causal claim is because we're not controlling any other variables in this person's life, any other factors. So as a simple example, if we talk about children who play violent video games, we see many studies that, as you said, many studies that show them to be more aggressive. But there could be other factors that are causing both the playing of the video games and the aggression. For example, children who are not supervised. And they're alone at home a lot of the time. They're playing these games that if an adult were home, they wouldn't be allowed to play, let's say. So they're playing these video games. That's one factor. Separately, they could be experiencing a lot of distress or frustration or anger because their parents are not around much. So that could lead them to be aggressive. So then you have a child who's playing these video games that are violent and also is aggressive, but the games are not causing the aggression. This third variable of these parents not being present, not being able to teach normative behavior, is somehow affecting both of these variables. So there is a link between aggression and video games. We know that, but all we can say is that it's a measured link, not necessarily a causal link.
Okay, and if we talk about actual violence that children may experience, unfortunately, many of them may see it in the home with their parents. And we know a lot these days about women's shelters for abused women and how we have to keep the men that are violent away from the women and the children that they may be abusing. And so with men that are violent and abuse their wives, their spouses or girlfriends, what is behind that? What are some of the sort of, I guess, consistent threads that we see with violent men who are abusing their spouses?
A highly consistent thread is that most of these men exhibit what psychologists call the dark triad. And the dark triad are these three traits of psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. So breaking that further into traits like manipulation, deception, egotism. So these are things that we tend to see in these abusers. That's an extremely consistent thread.
Okay, and we're actually starting to run out of time, believe it or not, so we're going to have to probably make our answers a little brief here, but I just want to go through a couple of things. There was a study called the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project, where they took 1,700 studies accumulated over the last 20 years looking at the partner abuse situation, which is intimate partners. And there were some interesting findings from this. We found out that about 25% of people have experienced partner abuse in relationships, and it also goes both ways. Men abuse their partners, as we've just been talking about, but also women have ways of striking out as well. Typically, when the women are the perpetrators of the violence, it's less severe. It doesn't cause significant injury. It might involve pushing or shoving and slapping and that kind of thing. Nonetheless, it's kind of troubling. Why are people engaging in partner abuse? What is the motivating factor behind that kind of intimate partner abuse that we've been reading about in the study?
So, first of all, the dark triad that we were talking about. So if we're breaking those, and then there's something else that I wanted to discuss as well in this context. But first of all, going back to the dark triad idea, that's a big thing. So as far as why are they, you're talking about obviously the two sides of it, like why is one person engaging in it, why is the other person there, okay? So the person that's engaging in it is likely to be narcissistic, for example, likely to have low impulse control. These are people with histories of violence, for example. Either verbal or physical. So it's starting for, you know, those are just words to say, well, these are their traits, right? But beyond that, you're asking why would somebody be staying in this, or the rates of it. Okay, so then let me answer that, and then also a third issue that I want to discuss that's more sociocultural.
We're down to about a minute now.
Okay.
So also let's talk about
yes.
the positive side, the fact that 75% of relationships don't involve abuse. So maybe we can tie those two together in the next minute.
Yes.
Those that are engaging in it and those that are not, the ones 75% that are not engaging, what are they doing right?
The 79% that are not engaging in it, they're doing four things correctly. They are not overly critical of their partners. They do not hold their partners in contempt. They feel like they were the ones that were lucky. Through decades, we see long-term relationships where they say, I felt so lucky. I'm still feeling like, wow, what are they doing with me? And then finally, and very simply, they are making time for fun, the kind of fun things that early on in relationships, in the early stages of dating, people do, the spontaneity, things like that. They find the time to do that well into middle age, well into raising children.
So it seems being non-critical is a big factor and not blaming the other.
Yes, particularly John Gottman's studies show that contempt expressed by women towards their husbands is a high predictor of divorce. He calls it one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, actually. Yeah. Okay. So he has three other predictors of divorce as well. So that's why, yeah.
All right, so we'll end on a positive note.
Okay.
75% of relationships do not involve abuse. That's a good thing. And we just need to encourage those that are not in that category to move into that category.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, and on that note, we will bring a close to the program. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Talking Points. Join us again soon for the next episode. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.